Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. This is a special edition of our show as we are conducting a one-on-one interview with author Craig Miller on his newly released book, More Movie Memories. Before I introduce Craig, I do want to note that all episodes of the Fanbase Weekly podcast this month are sponsored by Biolumin Press. We're honored to have Biolumin Press as a sponsor and look forward to sharing details about that publishing company with you later in the show. For anyone that doesn't recognize me or my voice, my name is Bryant Dillon. I am president of Fanbase Press. I'm co-host of the Fanbase Weekly podcast, which you're listening to right now. And I'm also the writer behind several projects, including our horror graphic novels, Something Animal and Identity Thief. Now, as I mentioned, this is a special podcast. We're joined by Craig Miller. He served as the original director of fan relations at Lucasfilm, working on Star Wars and then The Empire Strikes Back. As part of that, he was a publicist, a writer, an editor, and a producer. He wrote press materials and articles, created and ran the official Star Wars fan club, oversaw a staff who opened and responded to the seemingly tons of fan mail the films received, worked with licensees, created a telephone publicity stunt that accidentally shut down the state of Illinois' phone system, was a producer on projects ranging from the episodes of Sesame Street to commercials for Underoos, operated R2-D2, and spent weeks hanging out on the sets of The Empire Strikes Back. He, as I mentioned, is the author of Star Wars Memories and his new title, More Movie Memories. Both these books cover all those experiences and more. So let's go ahead and talk to the man himself. Craig, always a joy to talk to you. Thank you for joining me once again, and can't wait to talk to you about the new book.
Well, thank you for having me, Bryant. It's always great talking to you.
Well, let's start with basically your creative background. I know you and I have had lots of discussions about how you got started and some of the interesting tidbits and histories of tangents, I guess, of your career and all the ways that it's led you to these books. So can you just share a little bit about that, how you got started and how your career
Well,
path led to writing these two books?
yeah, my in school I have degrees in child development and social psychology. But from the time I was young, I was a comics fan and science fiction fan, movie, animation, everything, but especially science fiction fantasy genre. And to a great extent, it was getting involved with organized fandom that had me at the right place at the right time to end up director of fan relations at Lucasfilm. And from that, I continued after I left Lucasfilm as a consultant to Jim Henson, Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal Studios on a lot of different movies. Um, for basically throughout the late 70s and 80s. And then I wanted to try doing something more creative, more directly creative than marketing. Um, and while I had no real experience as a television or movie writer, for some reason I decided to become a writer. Um, and I had no, formal training. I hadn't beyond, the classes you take in college. But I'd always read scripts, and I'd been around animation and been around television and movies. And the first opportunity I had to try and get a job writing was in animation, and that was for what was then a brand new show called The Real Ghostbusters. Um, and um, basically, I was able to convince them to give me a try. I ended up writing 3 episodes of the first season of The Real Ghostbusters, and then got a job working on another animated show at a different studio on a show called The Bionic Six that I wrote 10 episodes of. And since then, I've been writing um, television, primarily for animation, but some live action as well. And when I was at Lucasfilm, I did a lot of public speaking, was doing presentations at conventions, was on a lot of panels,
Right.
and I would tell stories about working on Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, and both from of what I was doing, but also things we did in making those movies. And basically, for 40 years, people said, you should write a book. And I always said, thank you, great, but never felt like I really had enough stories to fill up a book. And then I was a guest at a Star Wars convention in Finse, Norway, which is where we shot the exteriors for The Empire Strikes Back. And they asked me to do a slideshow and a talk about Star Wars and Empire. And I did that. And it was pretty well received. And I thought, well, I now have this slideshow, which is in chronological order of the stories I told. Why don't I use that, see if I can turn that into a book? Do I have enough, use that as the framework?
Right. Yeah.
And I started writing, and I thought, yeah, how long is a book? Well, a novel, something to be called a novel, is 40,000 words or longer. These days, they seem to be a lot longer, but 40,000
Yes.
words was kind of the traditional, that made it a novel and not some form of short story. And um, I started compiling just the stories I'd already told on Facebook, and that was over 10,000 words. And I made a list of things, like a one line, um, talk about this, talk about that, talk about the other thing. And that was, a couple pages long just of topics. So I started writing, and the first book, Star Wars Memories, which is this one, ended up being over 100,000 words of Star Wars stories, just different things that had happened in my experience while working on those movies. Um, Starting with selling it to Fox, um, and Fox's research, which told them why they shouldn't make Star Wars and how they should change the title because no one would go see a movie called Star Wars. Anyway, I wrote that book, and it's been, I that came out in my typical good timing almost immediately before the COVID lockdown, just a couple months before the end
Right.
of
Right.
2019. Um, but the book has been very well received, very well, much to my surprise, really well reviewed. All the reviews, they're not all 5-star reviews, but they're all, they're almost all, I think it was like last time I looked, 93% 4 and 5-star reviews on Amazon and
Hmm.
Goodreads. And nobody hates it. No, today people hate everything.
That's
So
true. Especially Star Wars, you always get like 50-50.
yeah, and so all of the reviews have been very positive, which I'm, astonished by and thankful for. Um, and anyway, that came out in the end of 2019, and people said, "Well, you worked on all these other movies,
Right. Right.
and I've had a 30 plus career in animation. I should write a follow-up book telling more stories." And I thought, okay, well, let me think about that. And during COVID, one of the things I did, because we couldn't do anything, was you can see behind me where I'm in my office,
Hmm.
and you can see, I think, two of the then 6 file cabinets of everything I kept for 40 years. And we didn't clear those out, but we went through them file folder by file folders, like, okay, do I really need to keep this? And um, there's now 2 fewer file cabinets of paperwork. So I got rid of a third of it. And a bunch of other stuff turned up that I didn't really remember having. Um, and so the new book, More Movie Memories, is is really a continuation of Star Wars memories. The first third of it, more or less, is additional Star Wars stories, things I didn't remember or
Hmm.
didn't realize I had, like photos from or artwork from, that I could recount the stories. The next third is about all the movies I worked on after I left Lucasfilm. Superman 2, The Thing, Excalibur, Last Starfighter, The Dark Crystal, Crawl, all, lots of different genre. Probably I'd say maybe half of the genre movies of the 80s I consulted on in one degree or another. So that's the middle third, is talking about all of those. And then the last third is talking about shifting careers and becoming a television writer, and all the or many of the shows I worked on, from the real Ghostbusters, G.I. Joe, um, just the Smurfs, Curious
Hmm.
George, all kinds of different shows. So that's where the story, they're all um, anecdote stories about different things that I worked on, and my involvement with them, and things that I thought were interesting or amusing. And there are more stories, excuse me, there are more stories about things that didn't work out well, because those are funnier than, they hired me, I wrote the script, everybody loved it, they
Right,
made
right,
it,
right.
those aren't, though nice for me to say, but they're not amusing stories.
Sure.
So there's stories about why they didn't buy my Star Trek pitch and things like that.
Well, and I think the reason that I would I guess I would almost say this for anyone who's on the listening or watching, who's on the fence about buying your book. And why I think you get such a good response, why you have such high reviews. It, you have such a unique perspective on this stuff. There's been so much written about Star Wars alone, let alone, I mean, the other topics clearly have had fandom, maybe they're not equal to Star Wars, but still these are stories that or subjects that have been explored from many different
Oh
points of
yeah.
view. But I feel like, Greg, you have both the creator aspect, having been there, having been part of a lot of the creative teams or part of the promotional team or marketing team, but you also talk, especially in the new book, More Movie Memories. You talk a lot about what it was like growing up in fandom, or at sort of the birth of fandom. I think we could argue, oh no, fandom goes all the way back to the beginning of the human race, but you were really there in with the birth of Comic-Con, the birth of Star Wars, the things that really changed and set the course, I think, for pop culture and fandom going forward. And so to have someone there who can say, "Oh, hey, I was in the room when George Lucas said this," but also be like, have sort of that fan experience and share some of I don't know, just the pure joy and excitement and enjoyment of these stories. I mean, it takes me also back to what you were saying about, you know, um, the fact that maybe you didn't have an incredible formal education with like writing some of these stories, but boy, do you know and love and cherish storytelling and sci-fi and
Yeah.
genre storytelling. It's clear in all of your writings. And the other thing that is really great about these books for people that have read everything Star Wars, everything sci-fi, your stories are stories that I haven't heard before. I mean, 90% of them are things that I'm like, I've read a ton of stuff. These are coming from, uh, sort of it has this insider feel that is so exciting. I was reading the new book, and I remember when you're talking just about the Star Wars stuff, it was fascinating because you were hitting me at different time periods as a Star Wars fan, where I was like so envious and excited to hear about the rap party for Empire Strikes Back and on
Mm.
the Dagobah set, and the way that you lay out how cool and interesting that was. And then we go to your experiences about going to the premiere of The Force Awakens, Rogue One, The Last Jedi, and each one of those was really exciting for me too, because I just as a Star Wars fan don't know what it's like to go to one of those premieres, and to have that experience shared from someone like yourself. I just don't know that anyone else is telling those stories.
Yeah, one of the things when I started to write Star Wars memories, one of the things I set out for myself was there'd been so much stuff written about Star Wars that, well, it was two things. One is an awful lot of stuff was third and fourth and fifth hand and people recounting things they had
Sure.
read. Um, I didn't want to tell any stories that I wasn't involved with to some degree, so that it wasn't my reporting on what someone else did. It was, you know, there's a story at the near the beginning of Star Wars Memories that I wasn't part of. It was a lunch between George Lucas, Mark Hamill, and Harrison Ford, but both Mark and Harrison told me this story.
Okay.
So, that was close enough. I thought I could recount
Right.
it. But it was also so much has been written. No one needed me to be the 45th guy to tell them how lightsabers were done.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
And so I didn't want to tell those stories. Those have been read and told over and over and over again. So I made a point in both books of trying to only talk about things that people wouldn't have read. And one of
Hmm.
the nice things about those reviews that I've gotten is so many of them, especially from, hardcore, active Star Wars fans.
Super geeks. We know who we are.
Well, but people who are
No,
really,
I know what
really
you mean.
into it,
Yeah.
so many of them have been, I thought I knew everything about Star Wars, but I didn't
Right.
know this was all new stuff or almost all new stuff
Yeah.
to me.
Definitely.
And a lot of them had only knew these things because they had seen me at a convention tell this story. Um, but I mean, I made a big point of just really telling stuff that I didn't think other people would have already covered. And you're right. I mean, when I was like 11 years old, I got my local park to start a comic book club. Before I knew there was organized fandom or
Right.
conventions. And so a whole bunch of other local, I grew up in LA, comic book fans, living in the western part of Los Angeles came and joined the club. And I still know many of them, and quite a few of them are professionals in the comic book industry now. Um, but I mean, I've always been a fan and involved in fandom of comics, and um, I joined the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society
Right.
when I was 14 years old. That's a club that was started in 1934, a long time before even I was 14 years old. Um, and that got me involved with science fiction fandom. And so when I got the job on Star Wars, it was like, oh my God, I've been, loving science fiction. I was uh, like 22 years old. I just graduated from college. Maybe I was even younger than that. However, I was in my early 20s when I first got the job. And it was, just amazing to be actually working on a science fiction movie. My family wasn't in the entertainment industry.
Hmm.
I had no expectation of being in the movie or television business. Um, My studies were all in psychology. That's
Hmm.
the direction I was expecting to go. Um, so yeah, I came to everything, you know, as a fan and experiencing it as a fan. I mean, I knew what my job was and had to act relatively professionally,
Sure, right.
but I was having a great time.
Well, and I think that is got to be a key to not only your success and the relationships you've developed. When I think back to how we met, um, I remember that, Barbara and I had been part of the convention scene for a while. We were appearing at various conventions in Southern California. And we would just see you enough at conventions, wandering around, looking at Artist Alley and things like that, that we recognized you, even though we did not know who you were. And at one point, I think Barbara, after seeing you for at least a year or two, she just stopped you and was like, "Hey, I see you at all these conventions. What do you do? Who are you?" And that was just the start of a great relationship. But I guess what I want to ask about that is, for me, when we go to these conventions, especially when you get used to people who are part of the convention circuit, whether they're an exhibitor, someone who does signings, it's so often or so easy, I guess, to become embittered or to become
Hmm.
jaded with these things. And I
Yeah.
don't see that from you at all, Craig. You seem to truly enjoy
Oh,
going to these events, and I think you can have your own criticisms, but you seem to enjoy this. There's a purity there, and I just wanted to know: is there something? Is that true? And is there something that is there some sort of secret that you think to keeping that joy alive?
well, you're right. I love going to conventions. I love spending a lot of time in the art show or artist alley, the dealers area. Um, and it's just always been a big part of my life. My favorite thing, I'm a very social animal. I love talking to people, spending time with people, getting to know people. Um, and so for me, the best part of going to like San Diego Comic Con is just wandering through the exhibit hall, seeing what everyone's got, talking to people behind tables, running into friends either behind tables or just in the corridors. Um, I mean, I think that's just great. I love doing that. Um, I've been very fortunate to end up with a career that's given me a lot of great experiences on a lot of terrific projects. Um, And so I get to talk about that. I get to be on panels and talk about things um, because I've been around a long time, and so it's not that I know more than everybody. It's just I've had experience with a lot of stuff, and I can relate those experiences. Um, but no, I really enjoy going to conventions and spending time with people who are there because they enjoy the same material I enjoy, you know. Um, and I've been fortunate to get to know a lot of in comics artists, writers. Many of my good friends are professional comics writers, comics artists. In science fiction, many authors are good friends. Um, I've been involved with both attending and putting on conventions my whole life. Um, 40 years ago, it's astonishing to me how long ago I was chairman of the World Science Fiction Convention
Oh, wow.
when it was held in Anaheim in 1984, and I was actually co-chairman. Um, and now, 2 years from now, in 2026, I'm one of the division heads for the World Science Fiction Convention, which will be coming back to Anaheim
Oh, awesome.
after being away for many years.
Very
So
cool.
I'm not as involved with putting on conventions as I have been in the past, but I'm still involved with that and I still go to them whenever I can.
Well, let's talk a little bit about fandom, modern fandom, and what you've seen the growth of it since your involvement with it. I thought it would. There's a really interesting part in the book. I know it was somewhat embarrassing as you described it for you, but Dan Madsen, who
Oh,
is founder of Star Wars Celebration, Star Wars Insider, he called you the godfather of fandom or Star Wars fandom,
the Godfather of Star Wars fandom.
and
Yeah.
I guess what I you completely deserve that title. But what I really found fascinating about that conversation, or that description of that conversation, is the impact of something like the Star Wars fan club or the fan relations
Mhm.
organization, and the fact that that did to some degree have to be created from scratch at that time, that it was such a new thing, and that you talk about how your value, even after Star Wars, to a lot of these studios or a lot of these projects, was that you knew what fans would respond to. You knew how to connect the fandom, where to go, how to get them invested in these stories. So, what are your thoughts on? I mean, I know it's hard for us sometimes to look back and at our own work in sort of place in history. But what do you think of your place in fandom history, and what have you seen when it comes to the evolution of where we are now with fandom today?
Well, that's a broad question. Um, yeah, I was kind of surprised when Dan called me that. Um, I guess looking at it analytically, yeah, it's not an illegitimate title, all things considered. I just hadn't really thought of myself that way. Um, but you know, there was a man at Lucasfilm named Charlie Lippincott, who was the one who came up with actually marketing Star Wars directly to fans. Um, in large part because they had no other way to market Star Wars. Because at the time, as we've discussed before, today we forget that every other movie is science fiction and
Right.
superheroes. But in the 70s, science fiction was thought of as something for kids. It
Hmm.
wasn't, um, you know, something adults participated in. And movies in the 70s were all deep and profound and slice of life. And action adventure was not something movies were it was not a type of movie that was getting very much um, notice at that time. So there were no stars in Star Wars he could get booked onto talk shows because no one knew who Mark or Harrison or Carrie were. And Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing were certainly big names in England, but they were thought of as character actors here in the States.
Right.
So he came up with the idea of marketing directly to fans, and he knew about fandom, but he didn't know fandom, and that's where I got involved. He brought me in, um, and that was something I was able to do with Star Wars to know what the conventions were, who to talk to, who was publishing widely read fanzines. Remember, we had no internet back then, so we couldn't just open up a web page and do something like that. Um, and so I helped him shape that message and direct it. And as I talk about in More Movie Memories, after I left Lucasfilm and became a consultant, um, Rob Friedman, who was the vice president of publicity at Warner Brothers, having seen the success we had with Star Wars going to San Diego Comic Con to market it, to market Star Wars, he arranged to go down to San Diego to do a promotional appearance for Superman, the first Superman movie in 1978. And Rob's a good guy. I like him. I worked with him a number of times, but he really did not relate to the audience in San Diego. I was not in the room when he did his presentation, so I don't know what he said or what he did, but he got booed.
Yeah, I read that. That's
The audience booed him, and it's like,
hmm.
you know, the granddaddy of comic book conventions, an audience full of fans with the first, like A-level um, treatment of a superhero, and they booed him. What could he have said? Now, I don't think he was disrespectful, but he may have I'm just guessing. He may have acted like it was juvenile or
Sure.
something.
Hmm.
Rob was a kind of hip Hollywood guy who'd been in, working in the studios for many years. But so when I left Lucasfilm, he called me and wanted me to come in um, primarily to work on Superman 2. He knew they needed to go back to Comic-Con. He just didn't want to be the one to do it. So, it was really having that knowledge. And it also helped me even with non-genre stuff, like at Lucasfilm when we had More American Graffiti, we did a bunch of stuff with hot rodders because hot rodding was still a part of More American Graffiti, just like
Yeah,
it was
right.
part of American Graffiti. And so while I know nothing, I'm not a car guy. I know nothing about cars. I know nothing about hot rodding, but I know about being a fan of something and having that kind of intense interest. So we went out and did stuff with the National Hot Rod Association and stuff at um, the um, big race at Indianapolis, not the Indianapolis 500, the other big the NHRA race in
Okay.
Indianapolis. I forget the name of, and we had um, Candy Clark was Grand Marshal at a race in New Jersey. We worked with their publications. We did all kinds of because that's just being able to relate to people who are fans of things. And they're not that different than people who are fans of science fiction or fans of comic books. It's that thing you care about.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And it's just it's really interesting to see I guess the fact that it seems so common sense to us these days, but the idea that the connection had to be made at some point, of course, is just it's an obvious necessity, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it, I don't want to say it's knowing how to treat people, but that's part of it. It's knowing how to treat
Sure.
people,
Hmm. Yep.
treating everybody as an equal. Um, ever, I've certainly talked to fans who were kind of childish or
Sure. Hmm.
telling me stories that I've heard 100 times that, oh, they first saw this and it had this big effect on them. And it's like, it doesn't matter that I've heard the story 100 times from 100 different people. It's that it matters to the person talking to me about it
Yes, it does.
and
Yeah.
being interested in what they have to say. Um, it's that it had that effect on them is what's terrific, not whether or not it's a new story to me.
Hmm. Hmm. It's interesting how often parts of our social interactions are like that too, because I was just watching an interview where an actor, a stage actor, commented about how we often think that the applause at the end of the play is for the actors. And honestly, most actors, especially if they're doing a long run, would be like, you know what, if I could go home and skip the applause, that would
Yeah.
be fine. But the audience needs that catharsis. They need to be able to go, oh, we enjoyed this. We need to go through these motions and feel this shared experience with one another. And I think
Yeah.
it's a very similar experience when making a presentation like that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's as someone, I'm not an actor, but someone who stood in front of an audience countless times, their interest isn't in me.
Sure. Hmm.
It's in the things I'm talking to them about. It's how they react to it and what it means to them. Um, sure, it helps if I can speak in an entertaining way,
Hmm.
tell a funny story or a meaningful story or something, but it's about how they relate to it. And that's, you know, from my old marketing days, it's not about anything but making the person feel a connection to, and it doesn't matter if it's a movie or a play or dish soap, some kind of connection that makes them want that involvement.
Well, I definitely want to talk to you more about the marketing aspect of your career. Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and we'll pick up right there. Listeners, stick with us. Craig, do you want to take a quick break or do you want to roll right into part two?
I'm good,
All right.
unless you want to take a break.
No, I'm good to roll in.
Okay.
Welcome back, listeners. We are back with Craig Miller discussing his new book, More Movie Memories. And we were just talking about, Craig, your experience with marketing for feature films, which is quite extensive. And I love being Facebook friends with you because you occasionally share these stories, these little bits of history from your own personal history, your career, where you were working on this film or that film, and some of the behind the scenes. I mean, the phone line that shut down
Hmm.
the Illinois phone grid. I mean, that's a great one. I mean, it's such an interesting aspect that you might not know about the marketing of Empire Strikes Back if you were not there when it was happening. And
Yeah.
then obviously the consequences just make it even more interesting. I guess what I wanted to ask in that regard is when it comes to your experiences in marketing these films, what do you think the most impactful lessons you learned were, and do you see your fingerprints on anything that has continued on in modern movie marketing? Because it's clearly exploded in I think in ways that it was not, I mean, with the internet and things like that, the marketing of movies is such a huge endeavor these days, and it seems like and you tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like when you started out with Star Wars, it was certain movies got marketed and some, kind of got marketed, or if at all.
Well, that's still true today. And I think, and I mentioned Charlie Lippincott before, and I'll mention him again. Um, Charlie was very smart guy when it came to marketing movies, and he knew to try new and different things. And he left Lucasfilm not about a year after I got there. I don't remember exactly when, but something like that. But he and the people who replaced him, and George and Gary Kurtz, and all the people there, it was kind of the Wild West in um, marketing movies. And we were making stuff up as we went along. There was this thing for a while called transmedia. That was the marketing term. And that was basically um, marketing something in many different areas, not
Right.
just where the product is. And I was at a conference once where they had a panel about it with some of the top transmedia guys. This was in the early 2000s, I guess, 2005, 2010 maybe. And someone in the audience said, "What was the best transmedia campaign ever?" And the entire panel agreed that it was the original marketing of Star Wars. Well, there wasn't transmedia. There wasn't a grand plan or vision. It was, how are we going to get people to think about going to a science fiction movie when no one wants to see science fiction?
Hmm.
It's made by filmmakers they don't really know, with actors they don't really know. So Charlie came up with, he sold the book, the novelization, you know, almost a year in advance of the movie coming out. I mean, it came out 6, 8 months in advance.
Hmm.
But um, the toy deal, the poster deal, all of the licensing was the transmedia. And although we certainly didn't have that term back then, it was just trying to get it out there so people would know it. What people don't realize about marketing is it isn't it's frequently not even getting people to want your specific product. Um, it's convincing them that it's a product, and by product, it could be a movie or dish soap or pizza, a type of pizza. It's knowing that they want that and then recognizing your name. The classic marketing school example, I assume there's I'm sure there are classes in marketing somewhere. Um, when you go into a supermarket and you look at 30 feet of different dish soap or laundry detergent, and you have to pick out one to buy, you have no idea which one is better than any of the others. You have almost certainly not done any research to determine that. So, oh, Palmolive.
Right,
Oh,
right.
you know, I
Dawn
don't
or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. I recognize that name. It must be good. And you may not even think that consciously. You just recognize it. So you take that one. The commercial isn't to convince you they're best. The commercial is so that you'll remember their name.
Yeah. Hmm.
And if you remember their name, it must be better. That's all part of marketing. And it's all so I mean, I was learning these kinds of lessons, but they gave us permission to try all kinds of things, like going to the conventions. And no one had to review my script or anything. And it wasn't that I had some expertise in speaking or marketing. It was just like, okay, you're in charge of the fan stuff. Go down there and tell them why Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back is great and they should go see it. Um, when and it's like the phone you brought up the phone line,
Yeah.
and it was like, okay, back in 1979, 800 numbers, those free long
Yeah.
distance numbers were fairly new, and answering machines were fairly new.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I said, let's do a thing where people can call up a number and get messages from the characters about the movie. And everyone's like, sounds cool. And so I was given my head. I wrote the messages. George read them, said fine. It wasn't they were fun and they weren't giving away anything, but I mean, there was no today you'd have 40 people reviewing it and the legal
Right.
department
Yeah.
would go over it, and it wasn't like that. And um I don't know who hired the phone company that we use, but some service company was hired. And, we set it up. We recorded all the messages with the actors performing their character. Um, and we, put them out there to market the movie. They were just things we were allowed to try. And it's like being creative. One of the things I hate about modern movie marketing is so many of the studios are just lazy. It's get an actor on a TV, to appear on a
Yeah.
talk show, get an article in People or, well, we don't have Entertainment Weekly anymore, but it was Entertainment Weekly. Now it's get on the appropriate web pages
Right. Yeah.
and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. And they're not, uh, Barbie did us an astonishing campaign. The new Deadpool movie did a
Sure. Yeah.
great campaign, but they went out there, they tried things, they got in people's faces, they made it something they made it fun to be associated with, to make people want to go see it. And if they hadn't done that kind of campaign on Barbie, it wouldn't have done, a fraction of the business it did.
Sure.
They convinced, you know, an enormous number of men that they wanted to go see Barbie. they convinced a lot of women outside of the age group you'd expect that they'd want to go see Barbie.
Sure. Hmm.
Um, and that was all, clever, hard work marketing. And so much now is just put it out there and do the minimum. And it makes me crazy to see how little effort they put into things.
Well,
And I wonder why movies don't sell.
the enthusiasm, I think, that you mentioned is palpable, even if it's subconscious. I think you connect to Deadpool, which is such an interesting that when I see connections. I guess what I'm saying is I see connections between what you're saying about Deadpool versus the original connections or promotion of Star Wars, and that would they're so different, but what is true there is they're giving the same some of the same room that you were given to someone like Ryan Reynolds, who's enthusiastic to go out there to try these crazy things, and then the audience feels that. And I think that there is this weird balance of it needs to be refined enough, but it also needs to be somewhat unrefined, because when
Yeah,
people talk about Star Wars being like the best transmedia example, I think what they're actually tapping into is it felt like there was something special happening at that
yeah,
moment, because it didn't
yeah.
feel boxed and packaged completely. It was just enough, but you were still getting
I think you're
something new.
completely right. I mean, getting um it's not really getting the studio to spend big money on the new Deadpool movie wasn't that hard. It was a very
Sure.
expensive movie, and it had already two movies before it that made a lot of money. But they let them market it in interesting ways on the early movies. I was it Deadpool or Deadpool 2? I can't remember. um, they didn't have money to market it at Comic-Con
Yeah.
in a
I think it was the
big
first one.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the first one. But in the convention center, I think you're laughing because you remember this. All of the bathrooms, the public bathrooms in the San Diego Convention Center had packaged Deadpool toilet seat covers
Yeah.
with a thing on it about how this was the only thing they'd let us, how they
Yeah.
only let us
Fox could
market.
only afford this or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was so funny and got everybody's attention.
Yep.
Um, and and it made you part of the gag. It's getting people involved. That's the
Yeah.
whole thing. It's get people involved. When we went to fans with Star Wars and Empire, getting people involved. Word of mouth is the best sales you can possibly have. So getting people enthusiastic about something 6 months or a year in advance, keeping them interested, doing more things. What people said to us with Empire, you don't have to sell this movie. Everyone loves Star Wars. They're going to go see it. We didn't take that attitude. We took the attitude,
Hmm.
it was certainly easier to get people to cover
Sure. Right.
Empire Strikes Back, but we took the attitude of we're selling a new movie. We
Hmm.
have to keep people interested. That's why we did things like the 800 numbers. That's why we still went to science fiction and comic book conventions doing slideshows, why we did all the different things. Um, why I approached Sesame Street about having R2 and 3PO on as guest stars. Um, Keep people thinking about it, get them involved, want them wanting to know more about it. I think that's the big trick to marketing. I think that's all of marketing is get people interested in whatever it is you're trying to market to them.
It's interesting, based on what you're saying, how much community plays a role in all aspects of your life. You're talking about how you crave it socially as an individual. It's clearly part of what you did with Star Wars and fandom. It's clearly part of marketing, because I think what we're talking about here is the sense of community. You are part of, the joke with Deadpool. You are part of a secret, group that is hungry for Star Wars. And I think that it even goes into your book. Your book, the way it's set up, each little story is almost like some sort of personal conversation someone might have with you, and they can be read like that, so they're incredibly digestible. I think you can very easily go through them and stop when you want to, pick right back up, but they also have a very warm, personable tone, like you're sitting with a friend and hearing this like secret story or memory or whatever. And I think it's just so interesting. What When you think about all those things, what do you think stories mean to you? Why are stories important? What role do they play in your life? How do they continue through these books?
Yeah, well, when I was writing the books, I was trying to write them very conversationally. Um, I wrote them the way I would tell them to someone, more or less. Fewer pauses and 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 all the time it's like, what was that guy's name? Is not actually in the book, but that it might be if we were having a conversation. But I tried to make them relatable. It's, storytelling. This isn't anything you don't know. Storytelling goes back to when we first became a a tribal people, where we
Hmm.
hung around together, and there were people who told stories over campfires or in the dark in the cave to make you feel better or to better understand the world around you. And I think, that's not some great secret truth. I think we all know that we grow up being told stories, being read stories. It's how we learn about the world, about each other, about ourselves. And I think storytelling is is just part of being people. I mean, I don't know that cats or wolves or gorillas tell stories. Maybe they do. Certainly, they have more language than we are able to understand. Um,
Sure.
but but it's that learning and community. Um, you know, whether or not you're religious, whatever Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, Quran, whatever, those are all stories of community and stories of culture and what binds us together. And that just to me is, you know, the thing that makes us a community, the thing that gives us shared experiences. Television and movies, and now YouTube and TikTok are those shared experiences we can either tell each other about or point people to or send them links to or whatever. And so I think stories and storytelling is enormously important. And there are different things that are, obviously I'm not a car guy. As I said,
Sure.
I'm not really interested in stories about cars. I'm not a sports guy. I don't really need stories about football or baseball. But that said, I've still seen tons of, winning team stories and the underdog comes back and, you know, but the thing is, the truth is they're not really about sports.
Hmm.
They're really about people and trying and heart and that kind of thing. It's like Ted Lasso, which was a terrific TV series, and now they're talking about doing another season of it
Yeah.
after it ended. Um, but you needed to know nothing about sports, and you didn't need to care at all about soccer or football, whatever you want to call it. And the secret is we call it soccer because the English called it soccer, and we adopted that name, and then the English changed to football. So, but linguistics, that I care about. But the game itself, I don't care about. But I mean, it's like it was all about people and relationships. It
Hmm.
wasn't about the sport. And that's all, again, your question that I've gone on too long about around storytelling.
Well, I think you haven't gone on too long at all, but I guess what I would add for my own part, what I really appreciate about you, Craig, and what I think you bring. I think everything you said is exactly spot on, but I think you also are an important member just of the storytelling community, the human the human race, if you will, in the sense that um we were almost talking about it before. It's very easy to become cynical and jaded. And what I see from you that I particularly appreciate and respect is someone who has seen so much, who has had so much experiences, who has had so many opportunities, but who does not dismiss others' opinions, does not look at new things as if they can't be as good as what's come before. You're very open-minded, and I feel like that is the
Thank
way
you.
that you treat things. You foster a community here that I think will outlive us all, and that's obviously I think the goal ultimately is if you love things like genre, storytelling, or movies, or comics, or whatever it might be. It could be sports stories or
Oh,
car
sure.
movies or whatever.
Oh,
Everyone
yeah.
has a different passion, but the idea is if you truly love it, I mean, and take it back to a Star Wars here. You don't want to possess it. You don't want to hold on to it till it dies in your hands. You want to be able to foster it and share it with others and have it grow beyond you and introduce new things to you at every point in your life. And so I see all of that in you, and I think that there's important that there are figures within various communities, whether we're talking about Hollywood communities, fandom communities, who uh, they put that out there as an example for others to emulate. And so I think that you are a positive force in all these communities.
Well, thank you. That's very, very nice and very kind of you to say. I try to be open-minded. I, you know, I have my opinions. I have things I like
Of
and don't
course,
like, but you know, you don't have to like the same things I like. Uh,
not
that,
everyone knows that these days.
yeah, yeah, that is certainly true. I mean, uh, there's plenty not to like, but I don't see any reason to go on and on. If someone says to me, "What did you think of X?" I'll tell them if I liked it or didn't like it and what about it that I felt those things. But there's no reason to seek out people to say, "Listen, you got to hear me tell you how awful this thing is."
Sure, sure.
Um,
Well, and also I think you bring this thing because that there's the fandom aspect, but you also bring something I think that's inherent to um, your professional career. People in the Hollywood or in the entertainment industry very often I feel like the people I've talked to lose the ability to connect to the humanity or the non-financial benefit of
uh,
the work. And I feel like you appreciate that as well. And being able to talk to you about, even if it's not the most present thing in each one of these stories, the fact that there is something in each one of these stories that's worth discussing about, as you said,
yeah,
how we connect with each other, how we know what it is to be human. There's a reason for telling these stories beyond just making money.
yeah, yeah. I mean, clearly, um, Hollywood, movies, television, publishing books, publishing comics, those are about making money. They are businesses, but they are doing it by providing entertainment. And so it's about telling good stories, telling involving stories, and getting people to care about things. Um, if you can make money while doing things people enjoy, that's great.
Definitely agree. Well, let me ask you this. Do you have any plans or aspirations for more books, more writing in this vein?
Um, not immediate, since this book just the new
Right,
book
right. I
just
don't want
came
to
out
like
last
immediately.
month,
What's next? Now that you've
but
just the ink is barely drying on
but
the typewriter.
I've been the last 30 some years I've been writing animation. and other things. And for 5 years, I taught writing at the Art Institute of California. So I've been toying with writing a book on writing animation.
Okay.
Um, and I've been trying to research um, related to Star Wars, a book on a biography of Gary Kurtz, who produced the first two Star Wars movies,
Right. Wow. That would be
um,
cool.
and lots of other stuff, because I think, I mean, Gary started, um, well, of course, he worked on student films at USC Film School, but he worked with Roger Corman. He worked on a lot of different movies in the 60s and 70s before Star Wars. He produced after Star Wars and Empire. And he's someone who always avoided the limelight. Um, Even when I was working with him on on Star Wars and Empire, and when I was working on other films he was producing, he didn't want any stories about him. And those people who are familiar with his involvement know how much he contributed to all of the movies he worked on, including
Mm.
the Star Wars movies, beyond his producing skills, his content, involvement with the content. And I think he deserves to be more widely known. I've spoken with his family, and they're all in favor of me doing this. The hard part is he started in the 60s and 70s, and so many of the people he worked with are gone now. So interviewing them becomes impossible. And because he avoided people writing about him,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of physical
Sure.
published stuff
Hmm.
about him. So getting coverage of the early years is um, tough, but that's something else I'm working on
Well,
in
that would be very
terms of
interesting,
the book.
especially with the conversation we were having, because I feel like whenever I've read stuff about Gary, there's always been very interesting thoughts from him about the kind of stories to tell and
Yeah,
why you tell those stories.
yeah, very much so. Gary and I met Gary on Star Wars, but we remained friends, um, you know, what, 40 years,
Hmm.
until his death. I worked on all of his films. He wrote the foreword for my first book.
Right.
Um, and so I really think he was an important figure and deserves to have more of his story known.
Oh, excellent. Well, let us know whenever you get that going. We would love to hear more.
Okay.
Um, But before we wrap up, I more movie memories. I had such a good time reading this book, Craig. I hope we got to talk about things during this conversation. It didn't spoil too much of the book for people, so they still want to go read it. But at least gave them a hunger to check it out. Is there anything that you would like to mention that we haven't touched on that you feel like is really a
Um,
fun aspect of the book or something people might be interested in?
well, it you know, even though I spent so many years in marketing, the thing I'm worst at is marketing me. Um, so, you know, the book is a little schizophrenic in that it talks about Star Wars, it talks about a lot of other genre movies, and it also talks a lot about animation
Hmm.
and writing for television. And there are different types of stories that I tell in those different areas. But I hope, they're all entertaining. I've written a lot of television. I've got like 300 TV credits.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm okay at telling stories. So I think they're interesting stories that tell different aspects of it, of how things came about, why things were done the way they are, how, like, you know uh, my experience, I had the rights along with my partner of the time to the ElfQuest comic books and
Right, right.
all the work we did trying to set up, and in fact, twice set up an ElfQuest animated feature, which in the end went away. Um, and now, finally, after many other companies have tried to do it, it's possible. It looks like there may finally be an
Yeah. So maybe
ElfQuest.
at Netflix, is that right?
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
We'll see.
Well, fingers crossed. Wendy and Richard are good friends. I've known uh, Wendy and Richard Pini,
Yeah,
who
right.
created and published ElfQuest. I've known Wendy since we were teenagers. Um, but stuff about that, stuff about our attempts on Star Trek, about
Hmm.
creating and selling an animated show called Pocket Dragon Adventures. We did 102 episodes of that, played all over the world on the BBC 7 days a week for 6 years. Um, and even a couple of things I was only tangentially involved with, like the redesign of Cheyenne Mountain to match a movie that didn't happen. Because I said, maybe you don't want people to let that find out that you based it on a movie. Um, but just lots of different stories. And I did try to tell it in all of the books are in little short anecdotal sections that run, anywhere from 1 to 10 pages so that they could be taken in small bites.
No, it's a great read. I highly recommend it, and
Oh, thank you.
just so glad that you could make some time to talk with me today,
Oh,
Craig. It's
always
always
happy
a
to
joy.
talk with you.
Is there anywhere that listeners should go to get a copy of this so they can become readers? Where should they go to get a copy of your book?
Well, the easiest place is Amazon.
Okay.
Both books are available from Amazon. I believe certainly the first book is Star Wars Memories is available from barnesandnoble.com and walmart.com. I think the second book is, but I don't know for sure on that. Um, I, for years, I just went to conventions and just wandered around
Right.
and did panels. Last couple years, I've been having a table. I was at San Diego Comic Con the last 2 years. Um, I don't have a table at LA Comic Con this year, but I will be doing a slideshow and talk based on Star Wars memories
Oh, nice.
there, and I'll see if I can arrange with someone to give me table space at least for Saturday to sign copies and sell copies there, and other places, and they can find me on Facebook. I do have Twitter and Blue Sky accounts, but I don't usually post on them. Uh, and I have an Instagram account too, but I'm a writer, so I've never really understood Instagram because isn't Instagram's for artists? It's all about
It
visuals.
is very visual focused, but now you can take pictures of your book covers and put them up there.
Yeah. But um, Facebook is the easiest place to find me. Um, and I answer questions and post stories and talk about life in general.
Yes, you're very accessible, and I will also just to add to the encouragement. If you are at San Diego Comic Con, definitely swing through Small Press. You'll find Craig there. Definitely want to stop by and either pick up your book there or bring your copy to get it personalized because it will
Yeah.
be an experience you remember.
And I
Well,
do, if people contact me through my Facebook page, I do arrange to sell and sign a book and send it to them.
oh, excellent. That's very nice.
I mean, I don't charge for the signature, they have to pay for the book and the
Sure,
print.
of course, of
I-
course.
But I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to connect with people who are interested, uh,
Excellent.
talk to people at conventions and stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Craig. Really appreciate it. And we will once again encourage our listeners to go ahead and pick up a copy of More Movie Memories as soon as they can.
Okay, well, thank you.